Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today with me, William Wallis, and my show, William Wallis for America. Next to me, you're going to see a familiar face. I've had him on the show again. Representative Jack McFarland, how are you doing today?
Doing well, William. Thank you for having me back.
No problem. Well, you say back. I want everybody to know, look, Jack is going to be my first do-over. And what I mean by that is we're going to interview him twice in the same session period, and I'm going to let him explain why. And I think it'll be really important to know why. But if you remember the last video we did, Representative McFarland was going to do a gas tax, and we're going to talk about that and his new legislation right now. So tell me, Jack, why did you pull the gas tax?
So, William, I began the process of putting out a proposal, a bill that I had been working on for quite some time. We began in September, and in September, let's go all the way back. What was going on in September? We had a presidential election happening. We were in Louisiana. We were extremely confident that we would get President Trump back in office.
We had low gas prices.
Had low gas prices. President Trump had been talking about an infrastructure package. I'd been meeting with my congressman. We knew we was going to have some matching money. You know, all these things we knew we had to work on. Well, you fast forward to February. To March, and now we're in April. But we get a different president. Gas prices are $1 a gallon higher now than they were 3 months ago. Our legislature and our constituents, I've done what all elected officials should do, William. I put a proposal out to the public and give them I wanted the input from them. Give them the option to tell me, what do you like and what do you don't like?
The people you represent.
The people I represent. Now, I even went further because I have traveled the state meeting with legislators, as well as civic groups and different organizations speaking on infrastructure. And in my package, as you remember, I had reform with revenue because I was not willing to ask for any new revenue unless I could reform DOTD.
And if they listen to that last video, which I'm going to keep up, I even posted on there's a lot of really good reform ideas in that previous legislation you had.
So with the realization that now, as a result of higher gas prices, we're not confident with where we're going with our leadership. The public has shared with me they really love the reform, but let's do the reform before we ask for any more revenue. Now, at the same time, there's some disappointment by some because there are those that I had probably 40 to 50% that want the revenue, that believe we need to make a substantial investment in our infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, you'll remember in our previous video together, that wasn't just roads and bridges. That was also roads, bridges, water, sewer, all these other things that really make up infrastructure. And our robbing Peter to pay Paul is why our other parts of our infrastructure are suffering now at the same time our roads and bridges are. But with that pullback, I stepped back and said, okay, plan B.
Yes.
You know, that's what good legislators do.
That's right.
Good businessmen do as well.
Exactly right. I like that.
Plan B. In the original proposal, I had proposed that we were going to take 4 cents of the original gas tax, which is under the Transportation Trust Fund, and move it to the Transportation Subfund, which is, as you remember, is constitutionally protected. It was a constitutional amendment.
Those lock boxes.
Yeah, passed by the voters. They supported it overwhelmingly, over 90%, back in 2017, 18. It was passed, and that protected our money because you could only spend it on roads and bridges.
Right.
You could not spend it on employees and their cost. So my new proposal is let's take the entire 16 cents, repeal it. That's the original 16 cents from 1984. Repeal that 16 cents, reenact it and reauthorize it in the Transportation Subfund, because that forces us.
Is that part one?
That's part one.
Okay.
That does what we've never had the will to do as a legislator. It forces us to take DOTD's employees' cost out of our Transportation Trust Fund. So now.
Sounds logical to me.
Sounds logical. So now you won't be using dollars that we intended as voters. We intended all of our gas tax dollars to go to roads, not employee salaries. So it forces the legislature to find about $180 million and other resources to fund just the employees' cost. Now, if we really want to be ambitious, which is my part two, my other
Oh,
bill.
wait, here's number 2. Okay, I got you.
So there's another bill that says
This is all as grit, you say.
this is still the GRID Act.
Okay.
And what I say, this is the GRID Act, but it got grittier.
Okay. So there's grit, there's grittier, and there's grittiest.
That's right.
Okay, 'cause there's 3 parts.
And it's coming.
Okay.
So the second part is the vehicle sales tax. Now, obviously, that's a tax that you would think would be allocated to roads and bridges. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're going to collect a vehicle sales tax, why wouldn't it go to things that are impacted by by vehicles? Well, it doesn't.
What does it go to?
It goes into the general fund.
Okay.
Now, there was, however, a statute that said once the vehicle sales tax reached a certain amount, it was around 300 million, anything above that would go into transportation trust fund for roads and bridges. Now, back in the Jindal administration, they came up short of revenue, so they did away with that revised statute. We call it a trigger. They did away with the trigger and sent the money back to the general fund instead of to roads and bridges. So once again, that loses, and when the public finds
Little
that
shell
out,
game there, I guess.
yeah, and when the
Yeah.
public finds that out, that's one reason they lose faith, they lose trust in us. We have to gain that trust back. So in that proposal, I want to move that money back where we intended it.
Right? I agree. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me.
Now,
I mean, besides, if a sales tax on cars, new cars, expensive cars, then rightfully those cars should be paying for, if they're spending a lot of money on a car,
Yeah.
they want good roads and bridges to drive them on.
certainly they do.
Yeah.
And I mean, we would expect, and we would appreciate if those dollars did go where we originally intended them. And my third part, the grittiest.
The grittiest of the Grid Act. Okay, got it.
So we have not revised our fees or self-generated revenue in DOTD in over 30 years. So my next proposal is we're going to go in and we're going to revise some of our fees that DOTD is responsible for generating self-generated revenue. The largest one of that is billboards. So
Billboards, this is interesting.
The DOTD is responsible for permitting billboards, and that permit has been $25 a year. $25 a year.
So all these billboards on all these highways that you see, a company only has to pay $25 to put it to
That's
have
right.
one.
So our proposal is we want 10% of what the billboards generate. Think about it. How many of us like what we see on the billboards? Most of us don't.
Okay.
Often what we see on the billboards is why our insurance premiums are so high.
Okay, good point.
So if there's going to be a profit made there, we want them to share in the DOTD's expenses. So anyways, we got other.
So all these, what I like about this, and correct me if I'm wrong if I didn't hear it right, but for what I'm gathering is that all 3 of these things that you're proposing, there's the revenue's already there. It's not raising not raising taxes on people.
That's
It's
right.
just redirecting the money to go towards roads and bridges. It's making government a little bit more responsible. It's changing the path a little bit so that way, it goes where maybe
It does, and look, and there's also a fee in there for electric cars and hybrid. I still believe that they should be paying their fair share.
Mm-hmm.
So electric cars and hybrid cars don't pay the gas tax on the state level or the federal level. So they've had a free ride. The free ride is over. You're damaging the roads too. You got to share in the cost.
you're using the roads.
Yeah. So we're not asking
Have
for
a
anybody.
use fee.
Yeah, it's a use fee. We're not asking for anybody to do anything that the rest of us aren't doing. So, look, I've listened to the public. I've listened to legislators, spoke to dozens and dozens of civic groups, and the sentiment is, hey, we love what you're trying to reform. We like the audit. We still got the audits in there. We still have the transparency in there. Everybody wants that.
So the legislation that you had that you were proposing within the gas tax, that the same type of oversight and
Yeah.
reform, some of that is going to be in these types of bills.
It is. So we're using as much of that original reform. But to me, the greatest piece of reform overall is when you take the original 16 cents and you repeal it, but you reauthorize it in the transportation subfund. Because then you're actually reforming the way you spend your tax dollars. Because you're putting them where they're protected and they're going to where the public intended.
So that's number one. And just in summary, number two, in one sentence or two sentences for number
vehicle sales tax.
Vehicle sales tax.
Putting it back, and then self-generated revenue to help fund DOTD.
And number three is taxing the sign, getting a percentage on the billboards.
That's right.
And all of this is the GRIT Act.
It's all the GRIT Act.
And what does GRIT stand for again?
Government Reform and Transportation.
I like that. So there you go. So you can look this up. I think it's a great plan. I think it sounds smart. Like any time that we can, reform the way government spends our money to try to make it more efficient. And like I say this in other videos, even if this doesn't go through or didn't work out for some reason, I think that the spirit of reform and the spirit of trying to change the way the spending is done will be something that can be picked up by other legislators in the future. And I think it's a great step forward.
And it goes back to even gaining the public's trust by not just reforming DOTD and being more responsible with the dollars we've been entrusted to protect, but also as a legislator by putting a proposal out there for 6 months, listening to the public, listening to legislators, and then doing what the will of those individuals were. I think that's what every elected official should be trying to accomplish in their time in office.
I like hearing that.
It's called public service.
I like that. Well, it actually is service because when you hear about how much you all work for this position, it's a lot of time away from family and your regular job. Was there any parting words that for everybody, or definitely anything?
Look, William, I just want to thank you for giving me
welcome.
another go round at it and taking a second shot. And look, we all know we want a serious investment in our infrastructure.
Yeah.
We know there are things that need to change. So let's take the first step. Let's reform the way we're spending our money. And then when the public is trusting us and we've gained that trust and confidence that we're going to be wiser with their dollars, I think then they'll come to us and say, hey, we're prepared to pay more.
And who knows, maybe this type of reform will make it more profitable to where you don't have to go back to them for more money in the future.
It could very well happen.
Thank you very much. And everybody else, I hope to share this video. If you want to back up some of this information with his other video, you'll see some of those reform that we're talking about. Thank you all again very much and have a great day.